kicking us off in this week's Opinion Maker show around the topic of winter feed systems going into the future. I heard from our first guest at a recent New Zealand Institute for Primary Industry Management event here in Christchurch. Tell you what, if you're not signed up to it, if you're a member of the rural, working in the industry and supporting farmers and growers, please do sign up because they have some very, very valuable events and webinars at the NZ IPIM. And speaking on sort of the state of the rural real estate in Canterbury in particular, was Bayleys Canterbury director Ben Turner, and he highlighted a lot of the flow-on effects of these freshwater regulations are having because of the percentage of winter grazing on property that you can have going forward, as well as the history of winter grazing impacting on buyer demand for certain properties. And Ben joins us now. Ben, thank you so much for taking the time to add to the discussion around this. Could you please give a little bit of a background around what these rules are and what you're seeing the flow-on consequences of buyer demand?
Sure. Thank you, Sarah, for having us on this evening. It really comes down to it will have an impact as we go forward and move into these new regulations on values of some of these farms, particularly your sheep and beef farms that are looking to a new buyer, maybe wishing to transition into dairy support. Essentially, I guess, we're not the experts in it, and it's our job to give people advice on who the experts are to talk to when they're making these decisions. However, it's really your sheep and beef that if you haven't got that high nitrogen cap already, my understanding is that if you are, you're essentially going to be first in line for consent to winter graze and be able to continue to do that, or a big land use change of some sort. Or obviously it needs to take into account the soil type and are you next to any sensitive areas like rivers or lakes or anything that would also impact your ability to get consent to go ahead and winter graze. And obviously the 10% thing's quite simple and straightforward. So it will have an impact because some buyers looking at these properties either just won't be able to make them work from a cash flow point of view to be able to go in and purchase them, cash flow to pay their mortgages and get themselves up and running and get into farming for those first few years. That's traditionally how Canterbury has evolved over the last 15 to 20 years with a number of dairy farm conversions, which has actually allowed people to grow their farming and establish their families in the farming environment through that. So that is going to become more restrictive, which will restrict potentially competition for farms, which would have an impact on values.
And we're seeing that with some very high prices. What are some of those fundamentals that buyers are looking for in sort of that more sort of A+ dairy farm operation? What are they doing that's ticking those boxes to getting close up to 50,000 a hectare?
Look, what's happening there is that those farmers are spending the time. So it's not about, from our point of view, it's about us giving them the best advice. It's about understanding what's required or what those buyers will require straight off the bat as soon as they see that farm advertised. So it's not rushing out, putting the farm on the market a week after having a look at it. It's really getting all that information required. Most importantly are obviously, can they actually, the figures we're giving them on what that dairy farm is producing currently and the cow numbers they're running, can they do that into the future, or where are their reductions at and what do they have to do? And that's looked at through obviously their baselines and what they might have to do around carrying capacity and also their nitrogen cap, usage of nitrogen at the moment and how that's being managed to meet the new requirements so that production can stay the same. And to be fair, look, a lot of our farmers have been working with us for many, many years, and there's not a whole lot of farms that we are putting on the market or looking at now that aren't already within those caps and have been working to minimising that nitrogen use whilst keeping their production up.
What does this mean for the traditional runoff block and dairy grazing?
Well, it's such an important part of the region to get through, and obviously the cows have got to graze somewhere. We have seen more, and it's probably more driven out of perhaps in times when the dairy payout is lower and people are looking at their costs and perhaps more wintering on, and it's evolving into that more that Yeah, I think we're probably a wee bit more fortunate in Canterbury because we have had such an evolving dairy sector for the last 20 years that we've got a lot of properties that have historically winter grazed. It will be more for those that haven't, that are looking for land use change, that will have the biggest impact. But from what we hear on the ground, I don't believe there's a massive shortage out there of dairy grazing in there at this stage, but certainly for other parts of the country it will have a huge impact, particularly south of Melbourne.
From an interview I had last night from Dana Muir from BNZ, Head of Natural Capital, and the concept of natural capital that the financial institutions are now banking on and making part of their risk assessment when they're looking at investing in dairy farms across New Zealand. Natural capital is actually a valuable thing now, isn't it? And could you qualify how people are bringing that into their due diligence?
Look, the reality is, no, it is hard to quantify. It is another factor that I think is making up due diligence. The reality is, though, I think the fact is that it's really driving more so is people's, well, from a funding point of view, is their ability to pay that money back now, as we know. I think there's overriding factors that is part of it, but there's probably bigger things that we're seeing that are in their due diligence is basically around, can they run that same farming operation and produce what that farm is producing now in 2 years' time, which is a bit of a guesstimate because there's still a bit of betting in. I think there's still a wee bit of uncertainty as to how the national rules will overlay with our regional plan, and that's still being worked through. But it is, it is a factor in it, but not something that I can actually categorically quantify for you, unfortunately.
And everyone always wants to know the makeup of the current buyers of these high dairy land values. Is Canterbury going to become the land of the corporate farm?
No, look, I think we've got a good mix across the board of corporate and family. What we're seeing is a very diverse range of buyers, anywhere from family groups that are looking to expand, corporate to a certain point, but those corporates are made up of sort of one or two families that run a very good structure and are looking to expand. So look, I think we've got a whole range of buyers. What is interesting is that we are hearing from a lot of new buyers that we've never had in the market that are inquiring about dairy. They are looking for simple operations, asking about dairy farms if they were leased out, who would operate them, how all that works. But there is certainly a push, and there's been a major push in the last 12 months for a number of people that have traditionally invested in commercial properties, possibly even shares and things like that, that are turning to the dairy sector now and have confidence to invest. And the reality is there is so much expertise within that sector, and people's ability within that expertise to manage these farms for them, it can be kept a very simple asset. So I think we have got a really diverse range from mum and dad investors and people coming out of different business sectors that generate high cash flows, that are looking, they feel secure with the land-based operation. But it's interesting you say that, because the farms that they're really attracted to are those traditional real estate things: good location, good soils, underpinned by good water, that potentially in 20 years' time, these are all long-term investors. If it's not a dairy farm, it could grow vegetables or have different land uses. So they're still driven off the back of quality assets. But in saying that, look, they're prepared to pay for it.
And I just want to end on a sideline conversation I had with someone at that event a couple of weeks ago in Christchurch. Isn't it interesting now how the Central Plains water wasn't understood and was going to be a very expensive scheme for people to buy into, is now absolutely transpiring in values because of not just the water security, but also the environmental management plans that went around that water as well, that makes it easier, as you've just said, for those buyers.
Absolutely, that's right. It just gives you a much better chance of affecting land use change, and that might be going from a dairy support to a vegetable growing or a cropping scenario and things like that. I think people are understanding that, the value of having your environmental side of your farming operation taken care of under that regime. Yeah, and look, the most recent sales we've seen of land within that CPW area have been very solid and back up where they were 2 or 3 years ago. So that's showing good confidence in it. And those sales are coming from that dairy support point of view, so which is interesting because it gives you the ability to affect land use change on perhaps land that is currently irrigated but hasn't necessarily been used for dairy support. So there are very few areas within the Canterbury region that you can do that now under the new rules. So those benefits are really showing through. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Bayleys Canterbury Director Ben Turner there, talking to us around the flow-on and the action and reaction of winter grazing practices.
Oh, nice boots.
Yeah, thanks. They're new.
Ben, you alright?
Oh, yeah, sorry, mate. Just meerkatting pretty hard, eh? Yeah, I just said to myself, Ben, work hard. You deserve new boots.